Welcome to the July edition of the FO Exclusive. This is our signature program or a signature production, which we do every month. Glenn and I look at the most important issues of the month. Glenn Carle is a senior partner at FOI. He is a retired CIA officer. He is a top geopolitical analyst, and he has been my partner in crime for over 10 years. I'm Atul Singh, the founder, CEO, and editor-in-chief of Fair Observer. We publish over 3,000 authors from over 90 countries. Our goal is to inform and educate. We look at the issues behind the news, and we provide context. So, without further ado, let's get cracking. Last month, we focused on two key issues: Iran trumps Trump in new art of the deal, and two, Keir Starmer falls to the King of the North. This month, we will focus on two key issues again. And those two key issues are, number one, new fronts now in the US-Israel-Iran war. Number two, India's youth cockroach protests rattle Prime Minister Narendra Modi. Before we dive into these two key issues, let us do a quick recap of the month. So, America turned 250 on July 4th. I was in London and in Vienna having a very good time with my friends, but I hurried back from Europe to be here in Washington, D.C. This was my first 4th of July as a citizen. The fly past was impressive, the fireworks spectacular, but the speech, of course, US President Donald Trump's speech was a damp squib. It wasn't quite Thomas Jefferson, certainly not Abraham Lincoln, and a far cry from Teddy Roosevelt. I have Teddy Roosevelt's book right behind me, and I wonder what has happened to the quality of English prose. But we could say the same thing around the world, not just America. Importantly, I met a number of people who had come for the 250th celebrations, quite a few. I can't give you an exact count, but what occurred to me was that many of them coming from hardcore red states, many of them who had voted Republican and only Republican, weren't exactly jumping up and down about either the war or the state of the economy. And that, for me, is a good litmus test. Yes, it is anecdotal. I do not have data. I did not do a survey. But anyway, as we know, even surveys and data, as Sir Humphrey Appleby ably demonstrated, you can have the perfect balanced sample just by asking leading questions. So the conclusion, America at 250, certainly there was a sense of celebration, but also a sense of disquiet. On July 1st, we learned that President Donald Trump's latest financial disclosure shows his various businesses generated more than $2 billion in income in 2025. Note, this is his first year back in the White House. This is more than triple his reported income from the year before, that is 2024. The biggest gains, of course, come from the Trump family's cryptocurrency ventures. Glenn, this is extraordinary. The president is a fantastic businessman. He knows the art of the deal.
Yes, he does. Yes, a sucker is born every minute. So that gives us 60 times 60 times 24 times 365 a year. So there's ample ground for him to conduct his business.
Excellent. So just note that more ugliness came to the fore in the American political system, and this time it was not just because of the Republicans, but even this time it was because of the Democrats. The Democratic candidate in Maine's Senate race suspended his campaign after a woman accused him of raping her. Graham Plattner, war veteran, was a darling of Bernie Sanders. He represented the left wing of the party, the populist left wing of the party, and these disclosures have left egg on his backers' faces also left egg on a party that was going rather woke before Donald Trump rode into the White House. Well, there are cheerier things to note. America, Canada, and Mexico hosted a spectacular FIFA World Cup. The halftime show went on a little longer than most people would have liked. Roy Keane wasn't too pleased. He's a legendary Irish football player, the former captain of Manchester United. Even Wayne Rooney wasn't too pleased. And
Wayne
Wayne Rooney
Rooney
is a
was
legendary
definitely not
English player.
pleased.
Pardon me?
Rooney was definitely not pleased.
Yeah, I mean, I can't, think why they weren't happy to see Shakira, being delectably delightful. I just can't, for the life of me, imagine why people would have a problem with such a fantastic halftime show. But football
See,
players
you've
were.
already you have succumbed to American crass materialism and commercialism.
I have already. It didn't take long, did it? The final began 6 minutes late. The halftime show went on forever. Um, there were, of course, allegations of corruption, but it's FIFA. So, hey ho, there we go. Spain deservedly won against an ugly Argentina. In 1966, when Britain won the World Cup, rather, England won the World Cup when the World Cup was hosted on home soil. Um, and football has been going home since, but never quite gone home. Uh, Coming home, as they say, coming home, but never quite come. No pun intended, by the way. The then British manager called the Argentines animals. And that comment would hold for the behavior of the Argentine players during and after the final. After the final, of course, Trump very charmingly wanted to stay on and celebrate with the players, and the Spanish players wanted him off the podium or off. And Infantino, the infantile head of FIFA, had to drag Trump away. Um, Lindsey Graham, the senior or a senior American senator, as he was from South Carolina, died unexpectedly at the age of 71, which is rather young for a senator. He had just returned from Ukraine. He was pushing a bill to widen sanctions against Russia. Graham was also a close friend of Israel. Immediately, conspiracy theories started swirling around the internet and elsewhere that the Russians had knocked him off. Um, anyway, the important point is that Lindsey Graham is dead, and this is bad news for Israel and Ukraine. And there'll be an election in South Carolina, and we'll see what transpires. Let's move on across the pond to the UK. The UK has a new Prime Minister, Andy Burnham. He's had a good debut in 10 Downing Street. It has been an eventful month for the UK, though. Anne Widdecombe was murdered in her idyllic English village. She was a former member of Parliament. She was also a minister in the Tory government. And she had gone to Strictly Come Dancing, a television show. She was very popular. She had switched from the Tories to the populist right Reform UK. She was its justice spokeswoman. Widdecombe had, was a devout Christian, had converted to Catholicism, and fiercely resisted the transgender movement. Speaking of Catholicism, note that Andy Burnham is a Catholic too, and so was Tony Blair. And Catholics now outnumber Anglicans in the land of King Charles. On another important development in the UK, Nigel Farage, the leader of Reform UK, has resigned from the House of Commons. Apparently, he has taken some cash from a crypto billionaire, and he is being investigated. And of course, he calls this investigation a witch hunt. Therefore, he's resigned. And all of this is happening when more than half of England is in drought. Who would have thought that? I mean, the blessed Green Isle would be in drought because hot, dry weather has taken a toll on the country's water supplies. Some would also argue the privatization of water and then the takeover by private equity of water in the UK might not have helped, but hey ho, there we go. Let's just blame the weather for now. The centrists. Let's move on to Hungary.
One strange consequence of global warming is that during my last trip to England, I took gleeful pleasure in buying red wine grown in England. There are now English vineyards.
Yeah. And white wine in Sussex is actually pretty good. So let's move on across the channel now. We've moved across the pond, the Atlantic Ocean. Now we move across the channel, and we won't go into too much detail as to what's going on in Europe, but two political developments got our attention. The centrists, who now hold a supermajority in the Hungarian parliament. There was an election in April. The centrists won. Peter Magyar is the new prime minister. And his party, his new party, and the MPs, or rather the MPs, members of parliament of his new party, have passed a constitutional amendment that would remove Tamas Sulyok from the presidency and Peter Polt as head of the Constitutional Court. Peter Magyar says both of these men put their loyalty to Viktor Orban, the previous prime minister, above the interests of the nation, the Hungarian nation. Ipso facto, they have to go. So Hungary is really cleaning out, or rather defenestrating, to use a metaphor from that part of the world, all of the Orban elite. So this is a major change in Hungary. Now let's move on to France. And in France, the French parliament banned children under the age of 15 from using social media. France follows Australia as the second country to prohibit social media for youngsters by law. We expect this trend to gather strength in developed countries in the months ahead. I've had many discussions with members of parliament and politicians of many countries, of both the right and the left, who are deeply worried about social media. There's been a lot of research now about the addictive qualities of social media. Suicide rates have shot up. This is Professor Jean Twenge's research, if I remember her name correctly, and if I remember the study correctly. Forgive me if I'm wrong, but she's not the only one. There has been a whole body of research, and this research points that the dopamine hits to adolescent brains from social media make social media particularly addictive, lower attention spans, and increase depression, loneliness, anxiety, online bullying, all these wonderful things that come with the new age we live in.
If I can jump in, you talked about attention span, and that's a vital point to retain. Similarly, it appears that the social media changes cognition. It changes the way one thinks. And for hundreds of years, at least, the leading edges of society and societies in general have had a linear logic, rational way of reading, which comes in part from the written page. When social media dominates how one receives and perceives the external world, the receptions are image-based, emotion-centered, as opposed to reason-centered. And it doesn't make one stupider, but it does change the way one perceives and therefore conceives of the world, which is certainly a huge issue. And without passing judgment on it, it certainly is something that one should have some influence on in the way, as a parent, in shaping how a child comes to perceive the world.
We won't belabor the point, but very quickly, a number of parents who in particular concerned about their children's education, have been campaigning for limiting social media. And they've been chronicling their struggles and indeed even severe fights in taking cell phones off their children and getting them to actually do mathematics or do something that requires deep focus over a protracted period of time. So this is a parenting problem, and not just a political or social problem now. It has come down to torment too many families, and this cuts across ideology, at least so far. So let's move on to from France across the Mediterranean to Africa, and we will not cover all the developments. The fighting continues in Mali and Sudan. What's new? The two things that caught our eye in Africa were, one, Emerson Mnangagwa, if I hope I'm pronouncing this Zimbabwean leader's name correct. Maybe he might take offense and send an assassination squad. I hope not. I very much want to live. But this lovely chap, signed into law constitutional amendments to extend and cement his hold on power. The amendments abolish direct presidential elections and postpone the next vote. Emerson Mnangagwa is the new Robert Mugabe of Zimbabwe. So, as the French would say, la plus. The more things change, the more they remain the same. Yes, Robert Mugabe is gone, but there's a new Robert Mugabe in Zimbabwe. In neighboring South Africa, we do not have a dictator, but there we have populism. There we have economic stagnation. There are no jobs for South Africans. Anti-immigrant sentiment has been rising. Mobs have been targeting immigrants. And things have come to such a sorry state of affairs that Ghana asked Cyril Ramaphosa, the President Cyril Ramaphosa, to postpone his visit. So it's interesting to note that anti-immigrant sentiment exists not just in the US, but all the way in South Africa, the land of Nelson Mandela, the land that came up with a rather tolerant, open, and welcoming constitution not too long ago. After all, it's only in the 1990s that a democratic regime replaced, or a democratic government replaced the apartheid regime. So moving back west to Latin America, a key development occurred in Peru. Keiko Fujimori won Peru's presidential election. Note that her father was president as well. She is Japanese Peruvian. She studied in the US. She's a woman, of course, and another woman is taking charge. There's a woman in charge in Mexico, Claudia Sheinbaum. Claudia Sheinbaum is Jewish in a Catholic country, and Keiko Fujimori is Japanese in a country of mestizo and indigenous people, and of course some descendants of conquistadores, but certainly not the dominant ethnicity. And she's right-wing, unlike Claudia Sheinbaum. And this is interesting that another right-wing candidate has won in Latin America. And I'm told by many people this is because this fear of security, where the left has not controlled crime, the left has left cities unsafe, and so the pendulum has swung the other way. Now let's move on to some economics. And in April, May, and June, stock markets recorded their best quarter in 6 years. The S&P 500 rose by 15% from April to June, the Nasdaq Composite by 21%, and the Pan-European Stocks 600 by 10%. Nikkei 225 had its best 3 months ever, rising by 37%. South Korea's Kospi increased by 68%. That's largely because of semiconductors, I'm told. Even so, share prices of some big tech giants did not fare so well in June, with Apple, Meta, and Nvidia all down. Microsoft's Stock fell by 17%, the worst month since December 2000. The markets have cooled a bit in July. July has not been as frothy. Nevertheless, equity markets last quarter were particularly frothy, and a lot of investors are worried about it. Even as equity markets have been frothy, the economy of many major countries has not been doing well. On July 1st, German Chancellor Friedrich Merz unveiled a package of economic reforms which included 10 billion euros in annual income tax relief. Germany has had no growth for the last few years. In fact, the economy has contracted, and there are no jobs either. And Merz, who's a former corporate lawyer, he is from the CDU, Christian Democratic Union, the center-right party. He's trying his level best to kickstart German economic growth. He's taken off the debt brake. He has promised investment in defense. He's now decreased income tax. He's promised to roll back the regulatory sclerosis in the German economy, the red tape, death by red tape. So let's see where his efforts lead to, because the future not just of Germany, but also of Europe depends on Merz's success. Even as Merz is having a go at lifting the German economy out of the doldrums, yields on Japan's 10-year government bonds reached 2.9%, the highest since 1996. I'll repeat, the highest since 1996. Why does this matter? It matters because gross public debt is over 200% of the GDP. So a rise in interest rates pushes up the costs of borrowing, which means the government pays more in interest and has less left for guns and butter, as Glenn always says. As well as concerns about the weak yen, investors are also worried about how the government is going to fund its recently announced $2.3 trillion 14-year investment plan. So yes, you can see Germany and Japan, the two powerhouses, post-war powerhouses, facing their own challenges. And so actually is the US. The 30-year Treasury yield closed above 5% for 14 straight sessions through on Friday. We are recording this on 29 July. And what we are talking about is 24th of July, Friday. And this is the longest run above that level since July 2007. And remember, in 2007, 2008, we had a massive crisis. It was a global financial crisis. So the 30-year Treasury yields has finished above 5% level 29 times in 2025, already the most in any calendar year since 2007. Okay, so 30-year Treasury yields have crossed the 5% high watermark for the most number of times since 2007. So the danger signs are flashing red. At this time, US President Donald Trump has made a renewed push to impose tariffs using a range of measures. We know he's a genius. He's a very stable genius. And he has threatened to set duties of 50% on Canadian goods on August 19th. In retaliation for Canadian unfair practices, especially by Canadian provinces that don't buy American products. He's also ready to impose a new round of levies on countries after the 10% regime expires. Remember that his tariffs were declared unconstitutional by the Supreme Court, and he's working his way around this judgment. Donald Trump has also announced tariffs of 100% would be introduced for generic drugs from August 2028. This is quite significant. And this will, of course, hurt Indians. Meanwhile, American and Mexican negotiators held another session of bilateral trade talks. Trump has refused to extend the US-Mexico-Canada agreement, his own agreement, and he's negotiating with Canada and Mexico separately to seek changes to the pact. So no certainty of contract, no reliable trading partner, and all of this is happening at a time when bond yields are shooting up. So yeah, we can all cross our fingers if we believe in Jesus or any other god, Zeus. You can go pray. And maybe it is a good time to pray because this has been a month of natural disasters. Forest fires in Spain and France have been highly destructive. Peter Isaacson, our very dear colleague, can attest to it. He lives in Charente-Maritime, and he is not far from all the action. We know that from many climate experts and scientists that Europe is the fastest heating continent in the world, and Europe can expect more of this. Japan's southwestern Kyushu region has just had had an earthquake, and more than 100 aftershocks after this earthquake. This earthquake was yesterday, Tuesday, July 27th, or 27th of July, and has left at least 13 dead already. So that is our recap for July 2026. Obviously, we have left quite a few things out. It is impossible to cover everything that happens in the world, but we will now crack on, and we will now talk about, number one, new fronts now in the US-Israel-Iran war. So as of today, when we were looking at the BBC, we were looking at Deutsche Welle, we were looking at Al Jazeera, we were looking at all the news sources, and the one thing that hit us was that Saudi Arabia has joined US in strikes on Iran-backed militias in Iraq. That is quite a tectonic shift. And earlier this month, if you remember, Yemen's Houthis declared, this is on July 20th to be exact, 20 July, the Houthis declared a maritime embargo against Saudi Arabia, opening a new front in the war, expanding attacks on tankers carrying global energy and other supplies. Remember that the Houthis did impose an embargo earlier, and there was action in the early days of the Trump administration against the Houthis. Didn't lead to that much. And the Americans lost some jets as well. They apparently fell off the deck, as Glenn informed me. And then I read up on it. So we've had the Houthis now creating a double chokehold, not one chokehold, but two. You have the Bab el-Mandeb. You have to sail through the Bab el-Mandeb and then north to reach the Suez Canal. Or when you come down the Suez Canal and you go south, you have to get through the Bab el-Mandeb to then turn east or south for African or for Asian or African shoals. So this is a choke point. This is a key waterway. And now it's not just the Strait of Hormuz, but it is the Bab el-Mandeb, which is at risk. The Iranians have both of have their thumbs on both of these choke points, and Saudi Arabia has joined the US in strikes against Iran-backed militias, and Saudi Arabia was already has fought a war against the Houthis, so the Saudis are very much involved. Glenn, what is the meaning of all this? I mean, there are new theaters of war now, so educate us. I mean, you are the great strategist.
Well, let's try to make sense of the all of these seemingly simultaneous and disparate or disharmonious, wavelengths everywhere. And just one sentence on your canvassing of the past month's events before I speak about the Middle East specifically. To me, what emerged from all of that are that you touched upon over and over. The irrespective of the region about which you're speaking, the country you're speaking, or even ostensibly the issue, the recurring thread are structural challenges to economic growth among the world's economies that we seem to be focusing, as one does with the stock market, on, say, a blossoming flower while not paying enough attention to the roots that are being starved of water. And so we'll start to show slower growth. And each of the points you mentioned really touches upon strains approaching it, I would argue, a point where there's an inflection and the economies will start to reflect that. We're seeing this in long-term inflation issues in the U.S. But that's what seemed to be the takeaway to me from your canvassing of the cacophony of world events. In the Middle East, perhaps we can say a broadly similar thing if we take a strategic view. So we know that the out-and-out war between Iran, Israel, and the U.S. Israel, the U.S., and Iran, which has largely been a U.S.-Iran war for some time now, with Lebanon as a separate but related theater, largely stopped about 2 months ago, 10 weeks ago maybe. Since then, there have been a series of sporadic ceasefire violations. So there's been low-level conflict all the time. That has not surprised me or especially alarmed me. What's alarmed me is that the negotiations have no real basis for progress, since it has to be in both parties' interests to reach some sort of an agreement. And each party has to have enough pressure points to induce the other side to wish to make an agreement. And that is not really the case for Iran. It is for the United States. This is ironic, given that the United States is the superpower and Iran is a largely prostrate regional country. But the nature of warfare has changed, and so the victors have also changed. And that's what I'll talk about as we go forward. So we had about 10 days now of more serious conflict. Why? Because the Iranians don't see any particular reason for them to reach an agreement. They have greater influence in the region than they did before the start of the war. And it doesn't really matter, particularly, that they have a number of missile sites that are destroyed in Iran itself, for reasons I'll get to, which are essentially drones, and how asymmetric warfare is changing the nature of war and the nature and potential power of the great powers, meaning the US, China, Russia. So there are short-term economic consequences that I think all of us are aware of. On the whole, price of oil has gone up 6% in the last week or so. It's spiked to over $100 a barrel. It's settling. It's not settled at all, but it's hovering around $90 a barrel, which is enough to cause global inflation and to place a strain on global growth over a period of time. And we've already had a period of time since the war began. So these strains are becoming not just theoretical, but I think progressively real as this continues. And an unanticipated consequence, possibly greater in significance than the price of oil, which is hard to imagine, is the price of fertilizers, because without oil, petroleum, you don't have fertilizers at the global scale necessary. And if you don't have fertilizers as much, or the price of them goes substantially up, the price of food goes up substantially. And the poorer the country, the greater percentage of a person's income must be devoted to surviving, to eating. So this is also an inflationary and depressive consequence. Yeah, sorry.
Glenn, if I can very quickly jump in, I must give a shout out to the managing partner of FOI managing partner, Sanjay Acharya, and the big briefing we did on the war, which talked about the change in the resource architecture, number one. Number two, the change that it'll lead to in the financial architecture. First, the resource architecture will change, because if you're not getting inputs, real inputs for the real economy, whether it is oil, whether it is gas, whether it is fertilizers, whether it is helium, which is required for semiconductor manufacturing, whether it is sulfur, we could go on. Even aluminium supply is now constrained because a lot of it was manufactured in Bahrain. So if you have a real shock to in terms of inputs, then what happens is the resource architecture will change, because these factories will have to shift, demand will have to adjust, supply will have to adjust. That in turn will lead to a change in the financial architecture, because what I call the Gulf Stream, what happens is, if you are, and I've given this example many a time, if you are Bangladesh, you want to buy gas from Qatar, the first thing you do is you go out and buy dollars, because everything is priced in dollars. And so Qatar gets these dollars, and then Qatar says, what are we going to do with these dollars? Well, then Qatar goes and buys assets in the US, whether it is real estate or private equity or venture capital, or PJ, maybe they convert into the euros and buy PSG, the football club that has won 2 back-to-back Champions Leagues. And now, if Qatar is not getting those dollars from Bangladesh and all the other countries, Japan, China, etc., 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 then it's not the Gulf Stream that kept afloat the dollar, that kept bond yields down. All of that now suddenly reverses, because Qatar and all these Gulf monarchies are running very generous social welfare states. Qatar has Olympic-sized pools. Qatar has all kinds of facilities. You've been there. You've trained people there. And so then, instead of instead of investing dollars in Western economies, now Qatar might have to sell off its assets to fund its rather bloated expense sheets. And Qatar is better off than many other states. A lot of these Gulf states might start having to sell off Western assets. So you get the reverse Gulf Stream, and that'll obviously change the financial architecture of the world. And if that changes, then the security architecture will change. Why is Saudi Arabia now in an open pact with Pakistan? Because they don't think that America will lend troops. Yes, America can sell Patriot missiles and THAAD systems and F-16s and whatnot. But at the end of the day, the Saudis are fat and lazy. There are videos circulating of paunchy Saudi brigadier generals falling on their faces when fired upon by the Houthis. So where do you have a body of men who will do the fighting, good mercenaries who will fight, well-trained mercenaries who will fight for the Saudis? Well, Pakistan, a Sunni country, a country that borders Iran, a country that is Sunni, a country that needs money, that is always in a balance of payments crisis, that has been to the International Monetary Fund at least 17 times. So, hey ho, there we go. This is good. So it's very good for the military government in Pakistan, and now suddenly a net security provider in the Gulf is Pakistan. Similarly, Turkey might have a role in the future. Turkey will certainly intervene in Iraq. It won't allow Kurdish autonomy there. Turkey is intervening already in Syria. So the whole region that'll change the entire security architecture as well. So I have said repeatedly that the 2026 Hormuz crisis may end up like the 1956 Suez crisis. What 2026 may mean for the US might very well be similar to what 1956 meant for the UK. Over to you, sir.
I don't think that this is the U.S. is dramatically more powerful relative to anyone today still than Great Britain, France were in 1956. So I don't think it will be a Suez moment, but it is a substantial inflection point. And I'd add another vignette to show the successful pressure and leverage that Iran is bringing onto the United States, the ostensible superpower. Carrying on with the fertilizer example, even in the United States, which is the world's largest producer of petroleum products, a net exporter of petroleum products, and far removed from the immediate physical crisis in the Middle East, the breadbasket of the United States, the Midwest, the agricultural sector, are feeling already the economic pressures from the rise in the cost of fertilizer. This is also the stronghold, as it were, of support for Donald Trump. But there are inflationary pressures, financial pressures that extend to the direct voting base of Donald Trump, and even that extends then from the Middle East to the Middle West to New England and everywhere in the United States, where the average person, as we talked about before, is feeling quite strongly the rise in costs of food, which is the central element in an average citizen's perceptional framework or indices for
I put it
economic
simply,
and
more
social
simply.
well-being.
I put it more simply, Glenn. I have long held, and we've said so, that revolutions depend on the price of bread. And we can expect massive political movements, changes, street protests in the poorer parts of the world because there's a food crisis coming, major food crisis coming. A third of the fertilizers came through the Strait of Hormuz. There isn't a ready replacement. Russia, Ukraine also produced fertilizers. They're also at war. Without modern fertilizers, production will fall. This year, we are hearing about El Nino. There has been a lot of extreme weather already. We already talked about Britain being in drought. France and Spain aren't going to be much better. They don't produce much grain, though. There are other parts of the world that produce grain. Indian yields will suffer. Pakistani yields will suffer. So many African countries which produce lentils, which are that are exported to Asia, they will go down. So we are looking at a major food crisis in the months ahead, and it'll be a fuel, fertilizer, and food crisis hitting the poorer
Right.
economies
So
rather severely.
for the likes of me and a prosperous community in a rich country, that means buying a cheaper variety of tomato. For someone in many parts of the world, that means having fewer calories that they can afford to eat or obtain per day. I'm just agreeing with your point entirely. So this was the sort of the point of this is that the United States had the misfortune, or Donald Trump did, of choosing a war at one of the choke points of the world, but being unable to control the choke point. And strategists have known forever that there are critical geographical areas. These are the places over which wars are repeatedly fought. The top 5 choke points in the world. The first, the Strait of Hormuz, 20 million barrels of oil a day normally pass through that, and there's no pipeline bypass possible, and there will not be, even if there is, as there I believe is already, a dramatically enhanced construction program to create bypassing pipelines. That won't occur for 5 years anyway. The second one is the Strait of Malacca.
Just to add to your point, let's say, assuming they build pipelines at war level speed, they have a national mobilization like World War II. They get the pipe to Yanbu. Okay, fine. You can still have the Bab el Mandeb. So let's say if you've got to get your oil to China, you've got to sail all around Africa through the Mediterranean. You go around, come around the Cape of Good Hope, and then you go all the way to Asia. So even if there are pipelines, there are no easy solutions. Over to you.
No, because you touch exactly upon 2 of the consequent complications and problems. The next most significant one can debate this. It's slightly subjective. The choke point in the world is the Strait of Malacca. There are 94,000 ships a year that pass 270 a day. Some of you may well have been to Singapore or other parts of the Straits of Malacca and seen this. I have. It's an awesome site. That accounts for 25 to 29% of the world trade. The third is Suez, which is 12 to 14% of the world trade. The fourth is Bab el Mandab, which is 10 to 12% of global trade. Now, where is that? That's off the coast of Yemen. So we have Hormuz, Suez, and Bab el Mandab. Three of the top four choke points economically and strategically in the world are in the same region. All of them are within the area that is being destabilized by the Iran-U.S. war, or have been already stopped. The traffic through the Strait of Hormuz has been largely stopped. The traffic through Bab el-Mandab already, prior to this recent surge of Houthi engagements in the war, has dropped by 55%. And if the Bab el-Mandab is closed, then Suez is irrelevant because it depends on Bab el-Mandab. So all of these, as Atul pointed out, there's literally no way out, and the ways out imply that you have to go a long way around if you can get out. So this has given Iran tremendous leverage. Now, why? Why can't the greatest military power in history destroy this irritating regional power? Because the nature of warfare has changed. We have seen this with the war, Russia's invasion of Ukraine, and now in the Iran-U.S. war. Drones have fundamentally changed the nature of warfare. And I'll get out ahead of strategists here. Perhaps I'm ahead of the curve by a few years, but I don't think that I am too much. What has given the United States great power is spending a lot of money on capital systems, on major warships, in particular aircraft carriers, on aircraft, on major armor. And each of those three ways of projecting power can now be largely neutralized, or at least challenged, by $500 and up drones made by potentially the millions in a distributed network of back rooms, almost literally. And that's what we are seeing. In addition, the Iranians are very astute. Clever implies something pejorative and condescending, and I don't mean that at all. I mean, one can only admire the perceptiveness of their analyses and their actions. And they aren't just attacking American capital means of projecting power. They are attacking the entire region's economic infrastructure because it creates such pressure on the belligerent, the United States, to step back that it neutralizes the disproportionately greater conventional American military might. So when you attack a shopping mall, or in particular a computer company in Kuwait or the UAE, you are undoing the ability of the United States to impose its will on Iran at the cost of hostility from the region and destabilization. But if you're at the point of an existential choice, that really is a secondary consideration if you're in Tehran, isn't it? So Iran has lost
on that
internally.
point, to support what you're saying, Glenn, Kuwaitis feel under enormous pressure because Kuwait has no way out. Kuwait doesn't even have the pipeline option of Saudi Arabia. And Kuwait could very easily be devastated by Israeli strikes. They're well within range.
Absolutely.
Similarly, Iraq is fundamentally, I mean, yeah, it's divided between three ethnicities, or three groups of people, not necessarily ethnicities. One is, of course, the Shia population, which was persecuted and oppressed under Saddam Hussein. And the other, of course, are the Sunnis, Sunni Arabs, and the third are the Kurds. Now, a little bit of context here is important. Is this month, Iran conducted a spectacular funeral for Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. Who was he? Well, until recently, until February, he was the supreme leader of Iran. And he died on the first day of the war, or rather, Israeli strikes killed him on the first day of the war. And contrary to generally Shia tradition, you bury the dead quite quickly. They kept his body for a while. And during the ceasefire, they took his coffin around 5 cities, or they took his coffin across 5 cities in Iran and Iraq. And the coffin traveled over 6 days, traveled over 2,600 kilometers, that is 1,600 miles, over 6 days. And it whipped up public hysteria because the entire Shia founding myth lies in this idea of sacrifice. 72 of Hussein, along with his followers, 72 of them, charges 4,000 of Yazid's men. And all of them die fighting to the last man. And note that Khamenei referred to this in his last sermon or his last address to the nation. The two may be, maybe the same. And what this does is it feeds into the martyrdom myth that sustains Shia Iran, the theological basis of Iran. And of course, Mujtaba Khamenei, who has succeeded his father as the top Ayatollah, didn't appear. He was not seen during these funeral demonstrations, and he has not been seen since the strike. And that he may not even be alive, who knows? But the important thing is that it's whipped up nationalism and religious fervor and strengthened the regime. In contrast, Pete Hegseth, America's Secretary of War, he's no longer Secretary of Defense, as we know. He told U.S. Congress that Iran conflict has cost $37.5 billion so far. He needs an additional $67 billion for operations in the region. And many think that the cost is much higher because Iranian strikes have damaged American military facilities. And so the bill every day is mounting up for the US, and support for the war in the US, even amongst Donald Trump's supporters, is going down. So one side is completely fired up, and the other side is sort of, we are not so sure. Over to you, Glenn.
Well, for Iran, it's an existential issue, and for the United States, it's a war of choice that causes tomatoes to cost more, in a sense. And so who will be more committed? It's rather clear. 3 final assessments, takeaways, I think, from what's happening, and we've gone on far too long, and we will unfortunately probably stint our look at India, which is too bad, but we'll get there in a moment. So logistics have always been, for any serious military analyst, the key to victory, really, rather than strategy, which all of us amateurs think about. We think we're Napoleon when we should be as a quartermaster. And the war has shown that stockpiles are of munitions, a capability of causing harm, of killing, are as critical as the capability of the systems themselves. And the U.S. has had to ramp back its military strikes because it's run out of, and I'm simplifying just a bit, of ammunition. So strategic planning and preparation is always has been, but more now than ever, is decisive in how one may wage war and who is more likely to win. That's one thing. The second is,
Glenn, just to support you, let me give you numbers on munitions, because I have it from a very dear friend of Fair Observer and FOI, a rather erudite Marine. And this is publicly information data. Okay, so 1,000 plus Tomahawk cruise missiles, That's 27% of US inventory. That's gone. Note that this is a 10-year reconstitution timeline. Approximately 23% of JASSM inventory, that's gone. Approximately 33% of SM6 and 50% of SM3 interceptors, they're gone. 1,030 plus, and by the way, this accounting is of April 2026. So these numbers are as of 24 April 2026. 1,430 plus BAC3 interceptors, more than 50% of inventory gone. Approximately 150 THAAD, THAAD interceptors, up to 80% of theater available stock, that's gone. The entire fielded PRSM inventory, that's gone. I'll stop, Glenn, but this is just to give some numbers to back you up. So over to you.
The United States, perhaps this is a law for great powers. I'm not being facetious. I don't think it is, but at least the United States has fallen into the trap that Germany did in World War II. The Germans had the greatest tanks and artillery and so on in the world during World War II. Everyone knew this. The United States consciously decided not to care because they decided to make a serviceable tank, the Sherman, and to literally construct 10 to 100 of them for every one Panther tank or Tiger tank that the Germans built. The United States won because of industrial might, not technological brilliance. And here the United States has 13 aircraft carriers, which no one can match whatsoever. But one might ask whether it would make more sense to be able to build, as the Chinese are doing, 1,000 aircraft destroying missiles for the same cost as one aircraft carrier and at the cost of 0 human beings, or 1 million drones, all of which are capable of disrupting the straits and projecting your power. The final thing is, and this is an expression I take from the Modern War Institute, which has done some really good analyses, that cloud geography is now campaign geography, whereas the war was regional before and against military assets and the ability to project power. Now, threatened and actually targeted are companies such as Google, Microsoft, Palantir, Amazon, NVIDIA, which have regional offices in the Middle East and cloud capabilities. And that is an asymmetric thing. And the last point is a lesson that the United States applied in its Revolutionary War, and that great powers never seem to learn, is the power of asymmetric warfare. The American military never really rarely defeated strategically or tactically, I should say, the various Indian tribes and on the continent. It eventually destroyed them, but it didn't defeat them because asymmetric warfare.
The Apaches never lost, really.
That's right. That's right. Asymmetric warfare is a problem larger than a conventional military can solve. This reality is now extended not just regionally in the Middle East, but I would argue globally. And on that, I think we must turn to another issue, and I'm in your hands, Atul, on how long we want to do this, but it is
we'll go for
what's called the cockroach
minutes.
Protests.
Another 10 minutes. Okay. We move on to...
Okay, let me tee this up because I'm anxious to hear you explain what in the world is going on. So what started as a parody...
Let me give the headline. India's cockroach protests rattle Prime Minister Narendra Modi. I'll repeat. India's youth cockroach protests rattle Prime Minister Narendra Modi. Over to you.
So just broadly, and the details I don't know intimately, there was a leak in India of about the examinations affecting 2 million students, with implications of cheating and favoritism and disadvantage clearly for those who didn't benefit from the leak, and there were demonstrations against this. The Minister of Education, I think it was, named Pradhan, characterized the demonstrators as cockroaches, which did not go over well.
No, he didn't. That's a correction. It was the Chief Justice of India.
Uh-huh.
Surikant, if I'm getting his name correct, he called the youth cockroaches. So the minister didn't. We should be fair to the minister.
Okay.
The Pradhan did not disparage. It was the Chief Justice of India who did so.
Okay. So there are demonstrations against this apparent corruption, what quite clearly seems to have been the case, which were then derided, the demonstrations, by the authorities, which then, of course, enhanced the anger and the demonstrations. And so this has become a national level political crisis for the Modi government. Leading some even to think, was this the beginning of the end or so on? My sense is that that is probably taking the assessment a bit too far, uh, but it's also expanded the demonstrations into demands for more transparency of the government, greater democracy. It is not just, and I'm not minimizing the significance, it is not just an issue of students and exams any longer. So tell us, Atul, how significant is this for the Modi government? How substantial is it as a threat to and concern for Indian democracy?
So let's break down why these protests happen. So, and full disclosure, the National Testing Authority is headed by Abhishek Singh, and I know Abhishek forever. I was in Nagaland, he was in Nagaland. So I've been in touch with him over the years. So I do know the key personnel involved, quite literally personally, over decades, not years. So let's take a step back. Number one, leaks of papers have been going on for a while. They've been going on for decades, but they have really taken off over the last 10 years. And the key point to make here is that the leaks set off protests because public discontent had been brewing for a while. So let's begin with what a very senior IAS officer confided. IAS is Indian Administrative Service, the heaven-born elite that runs everything in India. They control everything, including the National Testing Authority, even though they have no experience of running exams. If you compare the UK, in the UK, it is someone who's an educationist. It's someone who spent his lifetime in the world of education assessing students, who runs exams, whether it is the A-levels or pretty much any other. In India, the National Testing Authority is headed by my dear friend Abhishek Singh, who was running the AI summit till yesterday, and he was in the Time 100 most influential people in AI. He has no experience of ever conducting an exam, and I don't think he will mind my saying so. But that is the nature of India. So the key thing is that tests have leaked, particularly in greater frequency since the Narendra Modi government came to power. Why? Because number one, if you work in the National Testing Agency, it's undermanned. And we'll do a longer piece on this because we are limited by time. It's undermanned, it uses contractors, it's structurally poorly designed. An IAS officer is plonked on top with no expertise in ever conducting an exam. And so the exams leak, and if they start leaking regularly, then the fairness of exams is in question. And in India, exams have been sacrosanct. They are the one way of ensuring social mobility in a country with few university spots and few jobs, and especially few good jobs. So the senior IAS officer confided in me and said that, number one, we've had discontent building for a while because the economy is dead and has been dead for a while. The demonetization decision destroyed small businesses, which meant that jobs died by the thousands. So if you are an online company, then you're doing well. But if you were running a small industry in Muzaffarnagar, UP, God help you. Second, the goods and sales tax came in the middle of the financial year. That destroyed further small businesses. We've covered all of this before in our podcast on the Indian economy, which is part of the dialectic. Third, more recently, public discontent, and I can say that this discontent, I can see it even in my own family because I'm from Uttar Pradesh. I am a Hindi speaker. A number of my family members have been in politics, are still in politics. The third thing that has really triggered discontent is the Ram Janmabhoomi corruption scandal. What does this mean? Creating a new temple for Lord Ram after demolishing a mosque was a civilizational project for the Hindu right. Basically, the idea was that we've been colonized by one invader after another. Our temples have been smashed. We will create a Vatican-like temple. There'll be a world-class university. There may be a world-class hospital, whatever. The point was that this was meant to be a civilizational project. It turns out that first, there was a scam when it came to land. Second, there was massive over-invoicing in construction. And third, they were just stealing the cash that devotees put in the temple. So this really shook up people, and my friend said, well, they cheated faith, and there are consequences to cheating faith. And even in my own family, there's this searing rage that how could you steal from the temple? I mean, not that they are religious, but it's like this is, you basically cheated on the very thing you promised. So that discontent was brewing already. Number four, what happened is that they also did the E20, which is because of the, believe it or not, the US-Israel-Iran war has created a massive crisis in India. India is not getting enough gas, enough oil. So they said, okay, 20% of all the fuel you use has to be ethanol. Now, this caused engine problems. This caused mileage to go down, and this hurt millions and millions. So if we look at the discontent that was brewing, and then the story of exams leaking one after the other, and there it is important to understand two things. Demand to do well in exams is really high. That is why you have a private coaching industry. And this private coaching industry spends more money now, according to some estimates, than the budget, the entire education budget of the country, which is mind-boggling. So let's say you're a parent, you have a child, and the child wants to get into IIT. You back this child off to Kota. In Kota, this child goes to a private coaching institution, and the coaching institution teaches this child to crack the competitive exam. By law, this child is supposed to go to school, but he doesn't. There's a dummy school in which registers fake attendance. And if the coaching institute, which is earning millions of dollars, this is a multi-billion-dollar industry, manages to bribe a relatively poorly paid official in the National Testing Authority, then that coaching will get more people through and will do more business. So the incentives are misaligned. My father thinks that coaching institutions have led to a culture of deceit, dishonesty, immorality, cheating. Yeah.
For a moment.
Yeah.
One of a couple of our listeners point out that in their personal experience, this is no surprise, I think, to anybody, from a long time ago, they were aware of similar kinds of cheating and leaks and corruption, let's call it that. So what makes this different this time? This is the spark coming on top of a dry sack of hay of discontent? Why
it was a spark on a dry sack of hay. Absolutely. It was a spark on the dry sack of hay. Absolutely. And the coaching industry has grown. And, it's interesting. Shiju Verghese is talking about CJP. And Shiju, with due respect, you don't even speak Hindi. So you have not even been able to understand what the protesters are saying. And so I'm not going to take you very seriously. And the other important thing is, forget about unattributed sources. There are obviously loads of social media abusive videos of young women shouting foul abuse against the prime minister, which has upset a lot of people, and including my mother, who says, "My God, this is terrible language, and it's foul language," which I won't repeat. And there absolutely, number one, there absolutely was this simmering discontent. Now, the argument that Shiju Verghese is making is there were vested interests. Of course, there are always vested interests. Okay. So, two things, right? He's talking about this Indian paranoia. Oh, Nepal blew up, Bangladesh blew up. There is regime change. The CIA is plotting this. Shiju, you can go ahead and say that. It's all Glenn plotting in his bunker how to get rid of Narendra Modi. I hear that and I laugh.
Are
It
you
is
saying
Indian
that my
paranoia.
ignorance is feigned?
So the important thing here is that initially, what I hear from rumors is there are wheels and within wheels, and who knows what's true, entirely true. But what is certainly the case is the government underestimated the Cockroach Janata Party. Number two, there was a massive intelligence failure. They did not estimate this to go out of hand. It is certainly true that Abhijit Dipke, the chap who started the protest, was in Boston, and Cockroach Janata Party was initially a political satire, but the discontent was real. The Lieutenant Governor was ambassador to the US, Taranjit Singh Sandhu. He's known to be a narcissist who was only interested in self-promotion. And shall we say he's fond of the good things in life? And his personal integrity is certainly in doubt amongst many circles. The commissioner of police was also in Washington, D.C. He was in Intelligence Bureau for the last 20 years, and I know him as well. Personally, I know him. I've met him. And he had no experience of policing for over 20 years. He was put in charge of Delhi police because, part one hears, because of the Lieutenant Governor, the former ambassador, Taranjit Singh Sandhu, because, of course, they go back to Washington. And he took charge at a time when the protests were getting out of hand. The earlier commissioner of police had advised the government, that is what I hear from my sources, not to arrest an activist from Ladakh who was on a hunger strike. But of course, they went ahead, arrested, and then everything blew up. So there was fundamental incompetence at the top, from the Lieutenant Governor responsible for law and order, from the Delhi Police Commissioner who had no experience of policing, just brought in from Intelligence Bureau. But those are micro matters. They don't matter. What really matters is that, yes, a lot of the people involved in the protests were involved with the Aam Aadmi Party, which began as an anti-corruption movement in 2014, but has lost credibility since. What is also true is that certain elements were linked with the Samajwadi Party. Okay? And they were certainly, and the main opposition got involved. And the main opposition, which is what the government didn't expect, Rahul Gandhi showed up in front of the Prime Minister's house and was arrested. And that, of course, led to even more upsurge of public opinion. What is coming out is that police has, in Bihar, there was an image of a policeman firing an AK-47. Some did use pellet guns, that's called video. They used sticks with nails in them. So the violence was disproportionate, and basically what I've been told is the feeling was that if we beat them up, these kids have only been in coaching, they will just, and once they run away, this protest will die down. So initially, the government ignored the protests, and then there was disproportionate force. Now, the reason why this protest is important is because this government literally is arrogant. This government has no feedback loop. You cannot talk to anybody at the top. And this is an open secret. You can go and talk to BJP members of legislative assemblies. You can go and talk to BJP members of parliament. They will say the same. On the record, Murli Manohar Joshi, who was education minister and one of the builders of the BJP in the 1990s, said that he was sad because of the violence against the students. And Murli Manohar Joshi is another UP leader. He was a professor at Allahabad University. And so even within the BJP, they're on public record, if people do their research, there is disapproval of the way this protest was handled, even though they talk about vested interests that Shiju Varghese talks about. But they certainly do not approve of the government. Now, in a nutshell, what has happened is Dharmendra Pradhan did resign. And this is after Rajnath Singh, the defense minister, said, "Is sarkar mein istife nahi hote," that this government does not do resignations. So this is a massive egg on the face of the government. This is a massive about turn. This is a first. And there was a real fear of protests getting out of hand. And the protests are important politically because for the first time, in some ways, the urban Hindu middle class is affected. The urban Hindu middle class is the bedrock of BJP support, which supported BJP through the years of opposition. And the only thing that this class cares about is examinations. That's the only avenue of social progress. And so if the examinations suspect, with the institutions failing, with the feeling that everything is for sale, whether it is a Supreme Court Chief Justice or the school leaving exam, there is a real shaking of the faith in the Indian Republic itself and the institutions of the Republic. This is much more beyond Narendra Modi. The important thing about these protests is that there's no constructive agenda. They don't have any idea except the resignation of the education minister. They do not have ideas about the reform of the National Testing Authority. They do not have ideas as to how to contain, as my father says, the coaching industry, because you have to contain it because you cannot have one multi-billion-dollar industry and a poorly paid state regulator run by an IS officer with no idea of examinations. And expect things to go awry. And so there's an element of mob rule. It is a bit like the French Revolution with emotion on the streets. But there is no constructive agenda of change on the part of the protesters, at least not yet. A lot of the leaders are ex-Aam Aadmi Party people, so there is a partisan divide in India. That is certainly true. So Shiju is right about yes, there is a partisan divide, but at the end of the day, the reality is that the institutions have failed. And Shiju Sangeeta is pointing out policemen were also beaten up and lynched. That is true. Some were, including an IPS officer. He came on a night patrol and he was beaten. Apparently, he had concussion. So that is true. So that is absolutely true that there was some violence on the side of the mob. But the discontent...
Since we don't want to take our listeners too far beyond, but so my last question would be, have we seen enough occur in this issue to conclude that, okay, this is a sign of political dissatisfaction, certainly among some, and that it has substantive implications and consequences going forward for the government?
I think this is the beginning of the end of the Hindu political project for now. It may reincarnate itself and come back. But let's assume you get India is a very young country. Millions of young people become eligible to vote every year. A number of BJP leaders are scared, and they said, "Ab bhai kuch saal vipaksh mein baithna hoga," meaning we'll have to sit a few years in the opposition now, because the reality is with the loss of faith of the Hindu middle class, the Ram Janmabhoomi scandal and then the exam scandal, it is highly unlikely that the BJP, which is already in a coalition government, is going to win a majority in the 543 seats. But the election is far away, and the economic crisis will intensify. The government will become more unpopular. Revolutions depend on the price of price of bread, as we've said so. So we will see, and the over-centralization, and this is the important thing that we should point out, that everywhere you go, you have the photograph, and you've been to India, of Modi everywhere. You go to IIT, there's Modi's photograph for G20. You take a train, there's Modi's photograph. Modi has run a semi-emergency in India. If he doesn't like you, there's an income tax raid, there's an enforcement directorate raid, there is some legal trouble, and you're in court for 20 years. So it is certainly semi-authoritarian. It isn't quite like Russia, but as I call it again and again, it is vegetarian Stalinism. And that sort of command and control and over-centralization means that, yes, you can take credit for everything, but when things go wrong, you have to take blame too. And that over-centralization of the party and government is failing. There is no feedback loop. Too many chief ministers are lackeys. And so as people turn against the government, support for Modi will slip away. Eventually, a new leader will emerge. There might be civil war within the BJP. There'll be conflict between the BJP and other political parties. Expect more chaos. Sadly, this movement is not a movement with coherent ideas. This is very much like Occupy Wall Street, in the sense that, yes, they do not like the government, they do not like exam leaks, but it is reactive, it is emotional, it is certainly the frenzy of a mob. So this movement may die, but something else will come up. There'll be protests on the streets, and expect a more fractious time ahead. And eventually, of course, expect 100% a coalition government of the opposition. The BJP will not win.
Okay. You heard it here first.
Excellent. On that note, we will see you next month. Bye for now.
Thank you.
Join the conversation at Fair Observer and subscribe to our YouTube channel.